Hey everyone, I'm just going to do a quick response to a few little bits from the recent Dollhouse episode that makes a few veiled references to me and I guess other people. There's so much hypocrisy on display that I'm not going to be able to address it all, but I just thought I'd get to a few of the key things.
Because I really like debate. I love it. I love arguing. I'll always take the other side.
Yeah, you and me both.
Like, the first one is just them saying that they love debate when there are numerous examples of people trying to take Edie up on her essentially blind support of what Israel is doing in Gaza, and her just being like, "F*** off, go f*** yourself. I'm not debating that. Anyone who thinks that is an idiot." Okay, so clearly you don't like hearing the arguments behind what people think.
And I liked listening to his reasonings for things.
And then they're like, you should respond to what people actually say.
Stop before you start criticising. I've criticised a lot of people, but I've tried to make it structurally based on the political arguments. This is what they said. This is what I think. So I'd like them to answer to that. Very, very logical. Why can't we go back to that and take people, I know this is idealistic, based on what they say?
And they actually say, like if you did that with Hitler, you could go back and look and see that he was saying kill all the Jews, and then you would know he was going to kill all the Jews. But like pretty famously, he didn't say kill all the Jews like explicitly, or gas all the Jews, or make like explicit plans about what he was going to do. And he was very careful to not put like the final solution explicitly in public so as to cause like mass panic, and kept it under wraps. And that's one part of the reason why like Germans were able to say we didn't know what was going on, because they were never like completely explicit about what they were doing. And two, why modern day neo-Nazis will like use that argument and say, well, it was never an official stated policy to murder all the Jews. And so therefore whatever murders happened were just unfortunate consequences of the war, which is like exactly the same argument that the Israelis are saying. We're not intentionally murdering everyone, they just are accidentally dying. And so Edie says like, respond to what people are actually saying. And it's like, yeah, you mean like the lawyers from South Africa who compiled the lists of genocidal statements made by Israeli politicians and media figures and military figures and took them to court to prosecute Israel for genocide? Like that type of responding to what people are actually saying? So in regards to what Edie actually said, here's part of an exchange on Twitter where someone says, leaving aside Islam, the historical account you provide of Israel is not correct. That's okay. Many people believe these things. More importantly, the key issue for the past 15 months is the slaughter/genocide being committed against civilians in Gaza. You seem insensitive to it. Edie Wyatt responds, war is not genocide. If you don't know the difference, it's not really worth talking to you. Oh, I thought you loved debate. And I'm not here to talk about men's wars anyway. And so, yeah, there's where the faux feminism is used to shut down debate. Like, oh, okay. Like, wasn't it a men's war when Hamas attacked on October 7th? But you care about that because the victims are from the racial group you care about. Talking about that wasn't getting involved in men's wars. But now when 100-fold the number of women and children are being murdered on the other side, suddenly, oh, that's petty men's business that I can't concern myself with. And like anyone can see that the casualties on October 7th were like 20% women, and half of those were at the Nova Music Festival, which even the Israelis acknowledge Hamas didn't know it was there. They didn't go to attack it. They were moving from one military target to another and got caught in a firefight with the Israeli military in the middle of this music festival, where it's pretty clear that Israel killed a massive amount of its own people, which can be shown by the fact that they had to revise the death count by hundreds because they originally counted many Hamas fighters as Israelis because their bodies were so badly burned and disfigured that they couldn't be identified. Now, Hamas only had small arms, machine guns and the like. So how did these bodies get so badly disfigured? Hundreds of bodies get so badly disfigured that they were miscounted because Israeli helicopters were firing on people at the music festival. So a big chunk of even the 20% of women that were killed on October 7th were likely killed by Israel. On the other hand, even by Israel's own count, the percentage of civilians that are murdered in their attacks are up around the 80-90% mark. And there's a lot of other stuff that we could get into, but I think I'll save it for the Morbid Symptoms episode where we cover this topic. Shout out to Tara and Laura, who is a regular guest on Morbid Symptoms. They did a great episode recently kind of covering this stuff, also covering the philia thing, similar contents to the recent Dollhouse episode, but far more informed. But the point is, Edie immediately shuts down the debate and says, no, if you think that it's a genocide, despite the fact that, like, so many organizations now have declared that what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. US organizations, Jewish organizations, Israeli organizations, the UN, human rights organizations, just like so many people think it's a genocide. And anyone with eyes can see it. Acts constituting genocide include deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. This refers to acts like starvation, forced deportation, and Israel has clearly been starving the Gazan population because they use resuming aid to Gaza as one of their bargaining chips in the negotiated ceasefire. So clearly they're using starvation as a political weapon against a civilian population.
Right, so Israel just got the kind of judgment you can't spin, veto, or blow away. The International Court of Justice has ruled that its blockade of Gaza isn't a security measure, it's a breach of humanitarian law, a textbook violation of the duties every occupying power signs up to. In one afternoon, the world's top judges dismantled 2 decades of excuses. No, Gaza isn't self-governing, and no, UNRWA isn't a front for Hamas. Even the courtroom decorum couldn't hide the scale of the spanking Israel got delivered to it, destroyed on every single count. Within hours, Israel of course vowed to ignore the decision, confirming exactly why it was issued. This wasn't a war crimes charge this time, though. It was worse. It was far worse. A formal declaration that Israel has stepped outside the law it claims to live by, and by declaring they are ignoring the ruling, they have now officially declared themselves to be a rogue state. Right, so yesterday the International Court of Justice issued a judgment, didn't it? Of course it did. That ended decades of ambiguity, let's call it, on Israel's part. In a packed courtroom in The Hague, the ICJ President Yuji Iwasawa read the opinion aloud. Israel, as the occupying power, must ensure the provision of food, water, fuel and medical care to civilians in Gaza, and must allow UN agencies, including UNRWA, to operate freely. That line changed everything. It confirmed that the Gaza Strip remains under Israeli occupation and that the siege imposed since 2023 violates the 4th Geneva Convention. The court ruled that starvation of civilians is illegal under any circumstance and that Israel's 2-year blockade, combined with the ban on UNRWA, constitutes a breach of international humanitarian law. The court also dismissed the centrepiece of Israel's public defence, the claim that UNRWA staff were infiltrated by Hamas. The judges found no credible evidence for that whatsoever. Israel lied through its teeth. Well, colour me surprised. But the court was having none of it. By rooting its language in treaty clauses rather than in politics, the ICJ left no room for error. There was no escape route for Israel left here. Gaza's deprivation was not unintended hardship, it was the direct result of Israeli policy. More than 2,000 Palestinians have already died near aid distribution points between March and May of this year, while convoys were being blocked. The legacy of the risibly called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. 360 UN staff were killed in the same period. These numbers were drawn from UN and ICRC field data already on record. The ruling, therefore, reflected fact and not sentiment. The advisory opinion runs to over 100 pages, as these things often have a tendency to do, but its conclusions fit onto one. Israel is the occupying power. It has failed to meet its humanitarian obligations. Its blockade and restrictions violate Article 55 and 56 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Its use of starvation breaches Article 54 of Additional Protocol 1. Its allegations against UNRWA lack evidence. 40 states and international organisations presented submissions. Only 2, the United States and Hungary, opposed the prevailing view. That near unanimity makes the ruling the most isolating legal defeat Israel has ever faced. The decision also activates another body of law now, Articles 40 and 41 of the Articles on State Responsibility. Other governments now have a duty not to recognise or assist an unlawful situation and to cooperate to end it. The legal burden has now shifted outwards. Complicity now carries its own liability. For those states insistent on assisting Israel, the legal consequences for them just got a whole lot bigger. And this is why this ruling cuts deeper than, say, the 2004 Wall opinion, or indeed the 2024 Genocide Prevention Order off the back of South Africa's case, which is the one many of us might have considered up until now to be the most significant. Those earlier cases defined principles. This one establishes evidence. It names the blockade, counts the dead, identifies obstruction as a deliberate act. The paper trail becomes a legal fuse here now. Within hours, of course, an Israeli official told Can News, however, that UNRWA will no longer set foot in Gaza. It was an open declaration, therefore, of non-compliance. Baby spitting the dummy again. Cue the toddler tantrums, all made on national TV. The same official repeated the discredited claim that UN agencies were controlled by Hamas and said Washington had been notified. That single quote converted a legal defeat into a diplomatic crisis. Israel had not only lost the case, it had chosen to defy the verdict. In law, that matters. Non-compliance extends the breach and invites countermeasures by other states. In politics, it forces allies to decide whether they will join Israel in violating international law, because they've now blatantly said that's exactly what they're going to do.
Furthermore, under this point, creating living conditions that would lead to the group's physical demise. And anyone who's seen Gaza at this point knows that it's basically a moonscape. The Israelis joke about it, be like, it's basically been reduced to rubble, and the argument is like, well, you guys can't live there anymore, so we're going to have to deport you. And it's like, well, then you've committed a genocide, obviously, if you have created conditions that make Gaza unlivable. And this is completely unlike any other war. It can be clearly demonstrated. It could be clearly demonstrated months ago. I did a video where I think it was the Washington Post took other comparable war zones and compared like the amount of buildings that had just been reduced to rubble, even in the fiercest fightings in other situations like Syria and the Ukraine and places like that, and Gaza eclipsed that. This article was done in December 2023, so just a couple of months of the Israelis being there had inflicted multiple times more damage on Gaza than cities that had been at war for years. So the argument is basically they accidentally committed the most vicious, intense bombing that no other army has committed anything comparable to. And the only thing they can compare it to are things like Hiroshima and Dresden, which everybody acknowledges are f***ing war crimes. But Edie's response is to just go, if you think that, you're dumb. And then when people go, oh, okay, well, you're supporting a genocide. You're calling me a genocider? You're saying I'm genociding people? That's hateful. Like, come on, man. That's like going like, I don't think what's going on in apartheid South Africa is wrong, but I'm not pro-apartheid. I'm not an apartheider. I've never been to South Africa. I've never divided white people from black people personally. I've certainly championed the government that does that and routinely made political defenses of the government that does that, but I'm not an apartheider. So the next thing Edie Wyatt actually wrote was, the State of Israel was founded because the world lost 75 million people fighting an oppressive, expansionist political ideology that calls for the extermination of Jews. Ironically, the Nazis actually helped build proto-Israel. So when the rest of the Jewish community was saying that there should be a boycott against Nazi Germany, similar to the boycott against apartheid South Africa and the boycott against Israel, the Nazis struck a deal with domestic Jewish capitalists, essentially, and ordinarily there would be rules in place to prevent capital flight. All countries would have rules against rich people basically taking all their wealth all of a sudden out of the country. So Jewish people could leave Germany. The Nazis really wanted Jewish people to leave Germany. But if rich Jewish people did that, they'd have to pay the same taxes that all rich people did. But because of the international boycott organized by the rest of Jewish people around the world, in particular Polish Jews, who tended to be a lot more working class than their German counterparts, Zionist Jews in Germany, this is prior to the Holocaust, struck a deal with the anti-Semitic German government, who said, in order to help stimulate the economy, what we'll do is we'll waive these taxes if you go to Israel and then we'll use your capital to essentially buy German steel and concrete and these types of things to help build up settlements in Palestine. And in this sense, some Nazis essentially thought of Israel as a self-governing ghetto. So a lot of proto-Israel was actually made out of Nazi industrial products. Because just as transgenderism seems like it is an ideology that's super pro-gay, but is actually deeply homophobic, Zionism seems like it's super pro-Jew, but is actually super anti-Semitic. And in the same way that transgenderism flourishes when societies are intensely homophobic, Zionism flourishes when societies are intensely anti-Semitic. And Zionism existed in the previous century. It didn't just start in response to the Holocaust. The Holocaust was simply, like, you know how 9/11 allowed the government to pass a whole bunch of draconian legislation that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to pass? And Naomi Klein talks about, like, disaster capitalism. A big disaster happens and the powers that be use it to implement things that they always wanted to implement. Zionism was originally carried out by people who wrote to the British government and said, basically, the colonization that you did in Africa with English people, we want to do in the Middle East with European Jews. And the Holocaust was merely the disaster that they were able to use to override the national sovereignty of Palestine. And just by the way, the vast majority of the 75 million people that were lost to the fight against Nazi Germany were from the communist nation of the USSR, that did the bulk of the fighting and dying out of any nation. But I digress. Edie continues. Islamism is an oppressive, expansionist political ideology that calls for the extermination of Jews. Now, this isn't true. This just isn't true. One, Islamism is like a broad spectrum of political ideologies. Basically anything that thinks politics and social life should be influenced by Islam is Islamist. And there's various different shades of people who think that, in the same way that there are various different shades of people who think Christian values should inform politics and society. And so, according to Grok, there are only 2 Islamist countries in the entire world. Because what makes a country Islamist is that the source of all legislation is Sharia law, and the government is structured to enforce political Islam. What is not Islamist is Islam being the state religion, but having secular, monarchist, or hybrid laws. So according to that definition, basically Afghanistan, Iran, and Gaza are the only regions that are Islamist. And within that, one, Afghanistan didn't get the way Afghanistan is by people being too Muslim. It got that way by the US funding fundamentalists to overthrow a progressive Afghan government. And even prior to the Soviet Union intervening into Afghanistan, Afghanistan had a history of progressivism. Even there was an Afghan monarchy, I think it existed in the 1930s, kind of like that era. And then I'm pretty sure there was like a secular government that came in between that and the socialist revolution, and then the socialist revolution happened, and that was struggling, and so it called for help from the USSR, and then America overthrew it, and that's why we have the Taliban. Likewise, there was a secular government in Syria that was overthrown by the United States with the support of Israel, and that's why Syria is up now. But Edie would just be like, oh, and look what's happening to Syria, as though it's that way purely because it got extra Muslim. There's no appreciation of what led to these things, and certainly not the role that the United States or Israel plays in fostering them. Like the fact that Israel has been funding ISIS-backed gangs in Gaza to fight Hamas, that goes without comment, because it would destroy the narrative to point out the fact that Islamic fundamentalists, Islamist or not, have often been propagated by either Israel or the West in order to advance their political agendas, because the thing that you want to make it seem like is that it's just Islam, and if you let people be Muslim near you, then very soon you could be living under ISIS. Which is actually super similar to the idea that Hitler was progressing, which was that the Bolsheviks are all Jews, and Jews are inherently tied to communism, and if you leave Jews in your country, there will be a communist revolution, and you will be living under a dictatorship.
Our guest is here. John Kiriakou is a former CIA analyst, case officer, senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and former counterterrorism consultant. He was the first to reveal that the CIA waterboarded detainees and to label waterboarding as torture. He subsequently became the sole CIA agent to go to jail in connection with the U.S. torture program. Of course, the person who goes to jail is the person who... Except that he was prosecuted by the Obama administration under the Espionage Act for being a whistleblower, whereas none of the individuals who actually engaged in the actual torture were prosecuted. Welcome back to the show, John Kiriakou. Good to see you in person.
You. Good to see you.
Now, you know this. This is the U.S. Embassy in Syria tweeted this out. We remain committed to bringing leading AQS figures in HTS to justice, meaning Al-Qaeda. That's basically Al-Qaeda.
I think he's sitting with David Petraeus in New York.
Well, so here he is.
Oh, my
here he is
God.
with our Secretary of State. So they had a $10 million reward on him, and now here he is. Literally, this guy, he takes off the terrorism garb, shaves his beard, and puts on a Brooks Brothers suit, and now he's meeting with the Secretary of State in the United States. This is Al-Qaeda leader in Syria, and here he is meeting with the former general and head of the CIA, former head of the CIA.
This guy, Jolani, don't forget, not only was a senior member of Al-Qaeda, he was the deputy founder of ISIS. Why? Because Al-Qaeda wasn't radical enough. And then all of a sudden, no, we're all fast friends.
Now we're best friends. It's so
best friends.
The bad algorithm on YouTube was that I was debunking the CIA narrative, or the establishment State Department narrative about the Syrian war.
Yes.
And I was showing that these gas
and that's
attacks...
easy to attack.
And so I was telling people that just like Tulsi was. If you get rid of Assad, who's going to take over? It's going to be al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, ISIS. That's who's going to take over the country. You guys realize this. And people called me a conspiracy theorist. If you Google me, I'm a conspiracy theorist about Syria, even though everything I said came true.
No, I'm with you 100% on Syria. I said on my own radio show, which of course has been canceled thanks to sanctions by the Biden administration. I said, whether you like his politics or not, Bashar al-Assad is the only thing standing between the Christian community in Syria and complete annihilation. The Washington Post then had somebody listening to the show, and they said that I was a threat to our democracy because I was raising these issues.
Yeah, no, you're a threat to the military-industrial complex. And so my theory is, and I want to run it past you, is that, and I've thought this for a long time, is that ISIS and al-Qaeda, well, al-Qaeda was obviously an invention of the United States in some way. Hillary Clinton even talked about that, how we created
ISIS
them.
was as well.
And ISIS, I think, is just, the key is they never attack Israel. So ISIS, when someone gets injured, Israeli doctors take care of ISIS. And they say it's because of God or something.
The most moral army in the world, Jimmy.
And they never attack. And they never attack inside Israel. Isn't that wild? Now we're on the same side. When did al-Qaeda stop being head choppers?
Well, that's a good question. And there's never been any explanation by the U.S. government as to why and even when the policy changed. You know, Donald Trump just said, apparently spontaneously one day, we're lifting sanctions on Syria. Why? You just saved a guy who co-founded ISIS, a guy who was the head of al-Qaeda, then called the Nusra Front in Syria. Why? What necessitated this change in policy? This is the guy that dedicated his life to murdering Americans.
Yes.
What do you tell all the military people or the families of military people who were killed in this fight?
Okay, you say no preference. There have been reports that Israel has been treating wounded Syrian rebel fighters in its hospitals on the border, including fighters from Nusra Front, which is, of course, the al-Qaeda proxy in Syria. Do those reports worry you that Israel's helping wounded al-Qaeda-aligned fighters?
As I said before, in a different context, it's always useful also to deal with your enemies in a humane way. And I think that when you have people who are wounded and you can deal with them in a humane way, the considerations as to whether to take them in are not simply whether it's politically useful or whether it's politically
So it's purely humanitarian, you say. So there's no tactical or political strategic...
I didn't say there's no tactical. I said the main consideration, the immediate consideration is humane.
But the tactical issues involved, I mean, you know better than me the phrase blowback. You don't think there's going to be blowback against Israel if you get into bed with a group like Nusra Front?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's going to be blowback.
Why?
Because I think that, unfortunately, the rules of the game in Syria are such that you can do anything that is not possible to be done anywhere else.
Yeah, I think people said that in Afghanistan too. Would you also treat Hezbollah fighters?
No. I would not treat...
Have you not just contradicted what you told me 60 seconds ago about humanely treating your enemies?
No. I think as far as Hezbollah fighters are concerned, with them we have a different account.
So let me be clear, you're happy to treat al-Qaeda fighters, but not Hezbollah fighters?
We have a different account with Hezbollah, a totally different account, because Hezbollah has carried out the type of actions against us which preclude us from going into what the al-Qaeda has done. Al-Qaeda, to the best of my recollection, has up to now not attacked Israel.
Secondly, if exterminating all the Jews was an inherent part of Islamism, then how come Iran has the largest Jewish population in the Middle East outside of Israel, and they have Jewish MPs, and they have synagogues? Like recently, after Israel attacked Iran multiple times without Iran either responding at all or only responding in very token ways, when Israel finally launched its full-on assault on Iran and Iran fought back, it was able to nearly wipe Israel out within 12 days. So if it's an inherent part of their ideology that's been unquestioned since the Islamic Revolution, how the are there still synagogues in Iran? Oh, it's part of their sneaky Islamist strategy to not invade surrounding countries while Israel's at war with basically everyone around it. And Netanyahu has said he supports the idea of a greater Israel, which is basically Israel invading and colonizing the entire Middle East in the same way that it's done with Palestine. Iran's being really sneaky, just keeping to itself in its expansionist ideology, yet they can't get rid of the synagogues or the MPs from their parliament. Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Likewise, in Gaza, there are Christian churches that have existed for hundreds of years. There's Christian members of the Palestinian Resistance. There's actually Jewish members of the Palestinian Resistance. One of them was released recently. They don't call themselves Jewish, but they study the Torah. And they, for all intents and purposes, are Jewish. So how come the Islamists didn't kill them? How come the Islamists didn't burn down all the churches? How come it was Israel bombing the churches that people were hiding in if it's the Islamists who want to kill everybody who's different? Not to mention that spitting on Christians is such a common part of Israeli society that recently when Netanyahu paid a whole bunch of US influencers to come to Israel, one of them said in an interview, we only got spat on once, as though that was something to be proud of. And so one of the things that Edie does to try and deflect legitimate criticism, one is falsely claim people aren't actually addressing her ideas when they often are, and she's just refusing to engage in a debate about them. Two is by personalizing the debate so often. So, for example, one of the things she took issue with, and the reason why her and I stopped talking, was because she was using the fact that she has like Arab and Muslim family members to say that she couldn't possibly be supporting a genocide in Palestine. And I made the quite legitimate comparison that that's basically the same thing as saying I have black friends so I can't be racist, or saying a black person can't be racist, or a woman can't be misogynist, or I have daughters so I can't be a misogynist, or any number of like standpoint epistemology type arguments that would instantly get dismissed if a leftist were making them. But for some reason we're supposed to placate Edie when she does it, and then she gets to get all offended and be like, oh, you're trying to say I'm killing my family members. And it's like, you're the one who brought them up, so they then become legitimate topics of political criticism. If you're offering them as a political argument, then your relationship to them becomes subject to political critique. If you don't want that to happen, try to make arguments based on actual objective fact rather than constantly referencing your own personal experiences, because they actually don't mean anything in regard to the wider world. There are like Palestinians who collaborate with Israel. So the fact that you started a family with a Lebanese man means nothing. And the people who have been allowing you to say that aren't helping you. Furthermore, this argument of like, oh, well, if you say I'm a genocider, even though I am currently denying a obvious genocide, then you're opening me up to harm. It's like, well, what the do you think you're doing when you're comparing Hamas to Nazis and saying that Nazi ideology has widespread support in Gaza? You're helping build the justification for a genocide and for one of the bloodiest atrocities that's happened in recent times, and not hypothetical. Like, the idea of somebody attacking you is so fucking remote and abstract, but you're still sitting there clutching your pearls, fretting about it, when we're watching piles and piles of children having their limbs amputated without anesthetic. Children being deliberately shot in the head and in the heart multiple times on the same child. Nurses reporting that like one day it'll be a whole bunch of kids all shot in the head. The next day they'll all be shot in the heart or all be shot in the genitals. So it's and that this isn't just happening in one region, but multiple different regions. So it's clear that people are basically just using them for target practice. And we're supposed to like give your fucking ultimately very, very, very privileged fretting some kind of priority. It's like really disgusting. And if you hadn't cut off all the people who were critiquing you, you might be more aware of it. But just like the trans people, it's like, no, the only people who are truly my friends are the people who like unquestioningly validate this ideology that I have pinned my personal existence to. And anyone who criticizes me is just trying to kill me. And now you're totally f***ed because you've like put your lot in, and you know, everyone makes mistakes. You can always turn it back, but it's going to be a lot harder now to do it than it would have been if you actually did love debate, as you falsely claim you do.
If you want to talk about the deep discomfort of the arts, dive in. So,
shine light into the thorns on their faces, say a prayer to the Lord.